Hello there, algebra students. This is Mr. Kashi speaking. With this video, we're going to be going through examples for 10-6 day 3, and we're going to be talking about the AC method. We're going to use the AC method to factor trinomials whenever there's a number out front, like this. There's a 3 out front. The examples that we've gone through so far haven't had a number like that. And just before we get started, it's called the AC method because if we were to write a trinomial in standard form, we call this standard form, and we have ax squared plus bx plus c. And how we do that is, it's called the AC method because we do a times c to start off with. And so we're going to go through 4 examples here, and there's kind of a lot of steps to go through. So just so you know, and then we'll go through kind of a list of steps for you to go through if you forget where to start. So for this, if we were to factor this trinomial, we have 3n squared plus 5n plus 2. We would do 3 times 2 first. So 3 times 2 equals 6, and that's why I brought up the 6 here for us. So we have a 6 here. We still have the 5 down below. So we have to find 2 numbers that multiply to 6 but add to 5. And hopefully you can see from our factor sheet we have 2 and 3. But now what we're going to be doing is something a little bit different. What we're going to do is we're going to come over here to our equation, and we're actually going to split up this 5n into 2 and 3. So what we're going to do is I'm going to say it's going to be 3n squared, and I'm going to put plus 3n plus 2n plus 2. These two numbers came over right in the middle there. And then what we're going to do is something that we've practiced before, a couple of videos before, is this factor by grouping. So I'm going to split this up into 2 halves. I'm going to factor out what I can from each side. So on this side I can factor out a 3, and I can factor out an n. So here this would be 3n, and then what's left inside the parentheses would be n plus 1. And then on the right hand side I can factor out a 2. So we factor out a 2 like this, and then what would be left would be n plus 1 as well. And so our final answer, we'd be bringing that 3n and that 2 together, would be 3n plus 2, and then we have n plus 1. Now that would be our factored form. And you could FOIL that out or box method. You can multiply that together to get it back up to our original expression if you'd like, to check to make sure that this works. But that is one example of how we use the AC method. So moving on to another example here. We're going to do 2 times negative 5. We have to do that whole thing. So we have 2 times negative 5. Negative 5 equals negative 10. So we have our diamond method. We have negative 10. And we have 9 on the bottom. So we have to multiply to negative 10. We have to add to 9. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to use the factors of 1 and 10. So here we have 1 and 10. One of them has to be negative because we're going to multiply to a negative 10, but they have to add to a positive 9. So this is going to be a negative 1. So then I'm going to rewrite the equation, splitting up this 9t. So we have 2t squared. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, let's see, minus 1t plus 10t minus 5. So we just split that 9t up into negative 1t and 10t because that is what our factor diamond showed us to do. So then I split this up. I factor out what I can from each side. On the left hand side I can only factor out a t. So this is going to be t, and then this is what's left is going to be 2t minus 1. And then on this side we're going to factor out a 5. They have 10 and 5 both have a factor of 5. And so then this is going to be a 2t minus 1 here as well. Remember, these have to match up in order for this to work. And so our final answer would be t plus 5, 2t minus 1. we just rewrite that 1 that's in common there. And this would be our final answer of our factored expression. Another example here, doing our AC method again, we have 4 times 10, which equals 40, which I'll put that right into our diamond like that. It has to multiply to 40, but add to negative 13. So that's a little bit trickier one. We have 5 and 8. Now 5 times 8 gives us 40, but 5 plus 8 doesn't give us a negative 13. But if we make them both negative, a negative 5 and a negative 8, that's still going to multiply to a positive 40, and then it's also going to add to a negative 13. So then I come over to the left, rewrite my equation. So I have 4x squared. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a minus 8x first, minus 5x second, so I can have the 10 there. Hopefully you can see how the 5 and the 10 match up and the 4 and the 8 match up better, so that's why I group them like that. I can put them in any order. Those two in the middle, I can put them in any order that I like in these middle two terms. So here I'm going to factor out a 4x, and then what I have left would be an x minus 2, because I factored out a 4, but I had an 8 there, so I'm going to factor that out. And then here I have minus 5x plus 10, but remember, I have to have it be an x minus 2. So what I like to do is I like to say, okay, well, this has to be x minus 2. What can I factor out to make that happen? I can factor out a negative 5. So the negative 5 comes out here, and if I factor out a negative 5 from the 10, that positive would have to change to a negative right there. It's probably the hardest part of the whole AC method, is knowing when to factor out a negative in order for this to work. So here we have our final answer, 4x minus 5, and then we have x minus 2. And that would be our factored form for this trinomial. We have one more example here. We'll go 2 times 15. Well, 2 times 15, that's going to equal our 30. Put that into our diamond. We have negative 11. This is a lot like the last example. 5 and 6, they're going to add to 11. But they need to add to a negative 11. So if we make them both negative, they will still multiply out to a positive 30. So here I'm going to go 2t squared, and then I'm going to do a minus 6t minus 5t plus 15. So once again, I change the order of those two because the 5 and the 15 match up, and the 2 and the 6 match up with common factors, and it's just easier to do it that way. Split them up. I'm going to factor out a 2t, and then I'm left with t minus 3. On the right hand side, I have to do that again. I have to factor out a negative 5. So I'm going to factor out a negative 5. Here I have t minus 3. Because 5 divided by a negative 5 would give 15 divided by a negative 5 would give me a negative 3. So I have to put these together. I have 2t minus 5, t minus 3. Be my factored form. And so what I wanted to do is, I know the video is getting a little bit longer, but I just wanted to go through steps of the AC method. So just writing some things down here to say, okay, how do I even start this again? So let's just start with step 1. I would multiply A times C and put into the diamond. Then step number 2 would be find the factors. Might want to use your factor sheet for that. 3, split up middle term. And step number 4 would be something that we called factor by grouping. And then 5, write your final answer. So hopefully this helps, just kind of going through the steps. I know there's a lot to think of, but hopefully these 4 examples and this list of steps help you using the AC method and factoring trinomials.